In the archives of the Natural History Museum of Trieste, this specimen sat completely unnoticed for exactly 101 years. Curators thought it was simply a worn, ancient jawbone. This is a micro-CT scan of that jawbone, belonging to an individual scientists call Lanche 1. He was a young man living in the late Neolithic period, roughly 6,500 years ago, in present-day Slovenia. An examination of his remaining teeth reveals distinct transverse grooves and heavy flattening across the chewing surfaces. These physiological scars are permanent records, indicating he survived periods of intense malnutrition and systemic stress during his early childhood development. High-resolution microtomography finally revealed a detail that had been invisible for a century. Inside a jagged vertical crack in the left canine, a foreign substance had been meticulously packed to seal the wound. For the vast majority of human history, hunter-gatherers experienced very low rates of tooth decay. Their high-protein, highly fibrous diet lacked the specific conditions required for widespread dental disease. That biological balance collapsed during the Neolithic Revolution. Human communities stopped foraging and began cultivating and processing heavy, starch-laden cereals. This dietary shift loaded the human mouth with fermentable carbohydrates. Streptococcus mutans and other acid-producing bacteria colonized the dental plaque, rapidly metabolizing these starches and excreting lactic acid directly onto the teeth. At the same time, early farmers ground their grains using rudimentary stone querns. This introduced microscopic sand and grit directly into their flour, aggressively grinding away the protective outer enamel of anyone who ate it. This chart shows how the transition from a fibrous hunter-gatherer diet to a carbohydrate-rich agricultural diet directly tracks with a massive proliferation in acid-producing bacteria. As populations settled into farming villages, they experienced an epidemic of cracked, infected teeth. It was this specific crucible of chronic pain that drove early societies to experiment with restorative interventions. The damage to Lanche 1's left canine was severe. The protective cusp was completely flattened, and a jagged 1.43 millimeter vertical fracture ran straight through the outer enamel. This diagram illustrates dentin, the softer tissue beneath the enamel. It consists of thousands of microscopic channels called dentinal tubules. When a fracture exposes them, cold air or liquids cause internal fluid to shift. This movement acts like a hydraulic piston, pulling directly on living nerve fibers. For this young man, the simple act of breathing on a cold morning or biting down on a piece of bread would have sent a sharp electric shock into his jaw. Enduring this level of mechanical and chemical agony was impossible. Relieving it required a targeted solution. This 3D reconstruction reveals the solution. The exposed cavity and vertical fracture were tightly packed with beeswax. Warmed by body heat, the wax became a pliable putty. It was pressed deep into the crevices, solidifying rapidly at mouth temperature to create a rigid, stable plug. This molecular diagram highlights beeswax's lipid-based ester composition, which makes it highly hydrophobic. By packing this water-repellent barrier over the exposed dentin, the practitioner chemically sealed the open tubules, instantly halting the painful fluid shifts. Scanning electron microscopes reveal a hypermineralized dead tract in the dentin, a defensive biological reaction formed only during life, intersecting the crack. Furthermore, sharp chippings along the fracture were sealed firmly beneath the wax. These physical markers prove the treatment was applied to a living, suffering patient. This treatment relied on a practical observation of how materials behave, selecting a substance that was pliable enough to fill a crack, yet stable enough to survive the moisture and constant friction of the human mouth. This map charts a broader history of early intervention. Thousands of years before Lanche, Paleolithic humans in Italy were using flint microliths to scrape out infected tissue, and by 9,000 years ago, early farmers in Pakistan were using bow drills to excavate cavities. As humanity transitioned into the Bronze Age, populations swelled and concentrated into dense urban centers. While metallurgy advanced, the heavy reliance on abrasive, processed agricultural diets caused rates of systemic stress and dental decay to skyrocket. Today, modern paleopathologists are bypassing fossilized plaque entirely, extracting and sequencing the DNA of ancient diseases directly from these ancient teeth. This genomic diagram maps how strains of bacteria from a single Bronze Age mouth were vastly more diverse than any modern strains. As human diets became increasingly refined, our protective oral microbiomes lost massive amounts of genetic diversity. The Neolithic beeswax filling was an early tactical response in an evolutionary bacterial arms race, one that escalated alongside human diets and continues today. This graphic breaks down the common myth that formal dentistry began with Bronze Age metalworkers. Radiocarbon dating places the launch filling firmly in the late Neolithic, predating the European Bronze Age by over a millennium. The pragmatic experimentation of these early farming communities eventually laid the groundwork for classical civilizations. By 1550 BCE, Egyptian physicians were writing formalized medical texts, using honey and botanical resins to pack cavities and stabilize loose teeth. Separated by 6,500 years, the underlying logic remains identical. A structural failure is identified, and a foreign material restores function and neutralizes pain. The deliberate, careful packing of wax into a microscopic crack requires an observational intellect, but more importantly, a desire to relieve the suffering of another person. The origins of medicine weren't born in the grand cities of antiquity, but in the observation of prehistoric people who looked at a neighbor's pain and figured out a way to stop it.